We are joined by Giles Gibson. He's in Riga in Latvia. Thank you for being with us, Giles. There are reports that Russia is pushing hard to capture the capital. Just tell us what is the latest from the ground.
Yeah, well, the Ukrainian authorities have been focusing on trying to establish these humanitarian corridors from Mariupol, that city that has just been under such terrible conditions, under siege for the last few days. They are also trying to establish a corridor for citizens to flee from towns and villages that are on the outskirts of Kiev. But really, over the last few hours or so, we've just been hearing report after report about shelling and airstrikes really interrupting or making those humanitarian corridors very, very difficult for people to pass through from. We've also heard lots of reports about some really heavy fighting to the northwest of the Ukrainian capital. In terms of what's coming up next, well, UK intelligence have been saying over the last few hours or so that the bulk of the Russian army, the bulk of the Russian forces are believed to be about 25 miles outside of the center of Kiev, and they are saying in the next few days some sort of a full-scale assault on the Ukrainian capital is looking increasingly likely.
Sure, and then the Ukrainian president, he has this push-pull with NATO. He's accused them of being weak. They haven't implemented the no-fly zone. At one point, he was even saying maybe he won't push NATO membership. But again, I guess wanting the intervention, any support that he can have, any signs of further support.
Well, we saw a bit of a flurry of activity at the end of this week on Friday. You know how you had the Europeans pledging that they were going to double their military aid to Ukraine. That's going to translate into about $550 million of extra military aid going to Kiev. We also, of course, had the US Senate passing a piece of legislation that had already been passed by the House of Representatives. That includes $13.6 billion of aid to Ukraine, not just military aid, but also humanitarian aid, so food and blankets and medicines, that kind of thing, all in that budget to be sent towards Ukraine in the coming weeks. I think as well as these big numbers that we're getting out of Washington and out of Brussels, the type of aid here is also really interesting to consider, because we have the UK government talking about sending what's known as Starstreak anti-aircraft missiles to the Ukrainian military, really reflecting this shift that we've seen in recent days, this conflict moving up into the skies more so than we've seen in the first couple of weeks.
All right, thank you for the latest. The ideal would be for the Russian president and the Ukrainian president to meet. It's hoped that they will eventually get to some sort of face-to-face meeting even. Is that looking increasingly less likely or more likely?
Yeah, that's looking pretty unlikely at this stage, because of course on Thursday you had the foreign ministers of Russia and Ukraine meeting in Turkey. That meeting wrapped up without any real progress towards any sort of a ceasefire, meaning that really a summit between the two leaders not looking very likely at all. We have had in the last few hours or so Vladimir Putin holding a joint phone conversation with Emmanuel Macron, the French president, and the German Chancellor Olaf Scholz. The Germans are saying that Macron and Scholz urged Putin to agree to an immediate ceasefire. They also called on him to keep up diplomatic efforts, to keep up negotiations with the Ukrainians in particular. And the French side also telling us in the last few minutes, really, that Vladimir Putin gave absolutely no sign during that call that he is prepared to end the fighting in Ukraine. So these diplomatic efforts are ongoing, but really not a lot of signs of any real progress.
All right, thank you very much. That was SABC News correspondent Giles Gibson from Latvia. And yes, concern now about the citizens in Kiev as the Russians push closer. We'll follow that for you.